Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our monthly Lunch and Learn program. I am Darlene. I'm the program manager here with Cancer Support Community Central Ohio, and we are thrilled to have Ellen with us with Lifeline of Ohio. April is Organ Donation Awareness Month, and we are thrilled that she was able to work us into her very busy schedule to come and share some information with us. So welcome, Ellen, and I am going to mute everybody again for clarity of sound, but you're welcome to unmute yourself as you have questions for her. So welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I want to tell you a little bit about who I am and what my background is, so you know where I'm coming from. I want to get you answers to all your questions. I will answer everything that I know, and I will be honest with you if I do not know the answer, but I will then get you the answer. We have very strong ties with the transplant community. We are the donation end. I have a little video I want to share about our organization so you'll know who Lifeline of Ohio is. But my background was that for 31 years, I taught special education. And after I retired, I said, okay, now what? How are you going to serve? And I realized that I had a passion about organ tissue and eye donation because twice in my life, someone that I love has become a donor. So I've walked that journey as part of a donor family, and my background had a focus on grief, especially grief in children. All my graduate work was related to that. And I knew I could have tough conversations. So I applied for a job and was hired as the in-house coordinator for organ tissue and eye donation at Riverside, at Ohio Health Riverside Methodist Hospital. And that job had two parts. One was educating hospital staff about organ donation and tissue donation and cornea donation. And the other part was as a family advocate. So my job was to accompany families on that journey, their worst possible day ever, that they've lost someone that they loved, but that person was able to be an organ donor. And I was there 24/7 to support them through those hours. And sometimes it would be a day in the hospital, right to the point that I walked them out of the hospital because that's a very long journey. So I have been part of this. I have been in the operating room. When my children started having grandbabies left and right, 2 of them 3 days apart, I realized that that 24-hour call schedule, 15 days of the month, wasn't giving me a whole lot of opportunity to be a supportive mom and grandmother. And so then I transitioned to a job in community outreach and education. So that's what landed me here. Lifeline of Ohio is located right across from the Lenox Town Center movie theater. It's right near Ohio State University Hospital. And this year we created a little spotlight video. It's pretty brief about our year in 2020, which was really unique. We went fully remote. That meant that the people in our call center, all of our education, everybody auditing records, financial, we were all working from home. Our hospital relations was not permitted into hospitals as hospitals had limited them. So they were working remotely. The only people that were in the hospital were our clinical teams that were working with organ recovery. So I'd like to share a little video about, not the post attendee, but I'll switch that over, about Lifeline of Ohio. You are seeing that, correct?
I'm not hearing anything though, Ellen.
Hold on a second. I believe I need to mute myself in order to do that. Hold on. I apologize. Let me stop share. Let me.
Still no volume.
I lost my screen. Hold on 1 second. This was not what we wanted. Okay.
Is there any sound or is it just me?
There's still no sound.
No, I haven't heard a thing.
No sound here.
I can hear the participants, but not you.
I'm so sorry. I assumed since I didn't hear from you again, Darlene, that I don't know what the problem is. I
Yeah,
explained,
I thought we could just let it run silently and we could watch the pictures, but
okay. I hope just looking from the visuals there, what you realize is that Lifeline is more than just recovering organs and tissues. We have a significant bereavement support. We do a lot to honor our donors. We have a beautiful donor memorial. If you notice the picture where they were handing an award, that was taken in our donor memorial, and it only shows a small part of it. But the panels have the names of organ tissue and cornea donors engraved, cut out, and they're backlit. So it's especially beautiful at night. We have a bereavement team to support donor families. They become part of our family forever. So Lifeline of Ohio is more than just the part of organ donation that takes place in the hospitals. We have that yearly run where people honor. And if you notice the young man who was tying his tennis shoes and getting ready to run, he's especially significant today because that young man received a heart transplant. And the reason he received a heart transplant was that he was a cancer survivor at the age of 3. He went through treatment from the time of 18 months till 3. Some of the medications that were necessary to save his life at that point were cardiotoxic. And at 28, he had a heart attack. And they fitted him with an LVAD, a left ventricular assist device, which is a mechanical pump that helped his heart until he could receive a heart transplant. So you can imagine at 28, this has been a long journey, but we see the opportunity for people to get a second chance at life. I met a mom who lost her 22-year-old son, and she put it this way. She said, the last chapter of his life would be the tragedy of his death. But through donation, we were able to write one more chapter, and it was one where he was a hero and gave someone else a second chance. So that's what we do. We give hope, we give second chances, and we give honor to the legacy of those donors who are so generous to give people a second chance. I'm going to screen share. There's no sound. So I like people to understand how many people we're talking about. And I'm going to be real honest. I brought up to our team that in the face of COVID, these numbers almost look insignificant. But here's what I know. Just like the statistics about cancer, it doesn't matter how many people there are if you're the one that has it, if your family's the one facing it. And that's true about organ donation as well. And I'm not big on statistics, but I do want to share this just to give you an idea. In the United States, 107,603 people are waiting for a life-saving transplant. I look that number up every time I talk to a group, and I never round it because every single one of those people matters to a whole community of people. Statistically, we add someone about every 10 minutes to the waiting list. What I want people to always understand that when we're talking about an organ transplant, this is their last option. They are people who are in end-stage organ failure, and their vital organs It's not like your gallbladder can fail and they can take it out and you can live on with medical treatment. But the people who are waiting for a life-saving transplant are waiting for a vital organ. Last year, we were able to save 39,035 people in spite of the pandemic, which is very powerful because things were very, very limited. We saw a lot of changes and hospitals were limited and overtaxed. I have to say, if I'm one of these 107,603 people, though, that number, as excited as we are about being able to save that many people, that number is tremendously troubling. I know if I was going to be told that I needed an organ transplant or someone I love needed an organ transplant, I would be devastated to know that that's how many people received an organ transplant in 2020. We did 66,278 cornea transplants, giving people sight. People who hadn't been able to see, hadn't been able to drive, may not have been able to continue in their work. We've had moms that had given birth and couldn't see their babies and then got a cornea transplant and got to see what their child actually looks like. And here's what surprises a lot of people. 1.7 million tissue grafts are needed each year for surgeries. So I often hear that in fact, my friend whose daughter was a donor, she said, oh, she couldn't be an organ donor. She could only be a tissue donor. And then we talked and we explained about how many surgeries require tissue in order to be successful. And people often are unaware of the fact that they've received tissue. Many times for breast reconstruction, if it's done immediately after a mastectomy, donated tissue is used to facilitate that, as opposed to a surgery where they're going to use skin expanders and it's going to occur later at a later time. People who've had bypass surgery. I know when I realized people were having bypass surgery and you saw that scar on their leg where they had removed blood vessels in order to do the detour around the blockage, you realize that that is as devastating as the actual heart surgery, to have an incision from the top of your leg to your ankle so that they could obtain that graft. Now we are able to use donated blood vessels and people don't have two major incisions to heal, and it's tremendously beneficial. It reduces the risk of infection significantly. People who have spinal fusion surgery have received bone tissue and many times don't even know that. I was in a classroom and a girl rolled in a wheelchair. She had a swimming t-shirt on and I said, oh, are you a swimmer? And she said, well, not anymore. And I asked, if she'd had an accident. She explained that yes, during the snow the year before, her brother and she were playing in the snow and they were jumping off their deck into a huge snowdrift. And she fractured her spine and it left her a paraplegic. Partway through my presentation, she suddenly raises her hand and she says, wait a minute, I just now understand what the doctor was saying when he talked about using bone to fuse my spine to my vertebrae together so they could put a cage around it. And she says, I never thought about where that bone came from, but it's donor bone. People who have torn ACL will receive tissue in many times because there's two ways to fix it. One requires them to remove a piece of your hamstring, but often in older people, that hamstring is somewhat compromised to begin with too, so they will use donor tissue to repair that. Also, athletes want to heal faster, and that's used the same. So organ donation gets a lot of the attention, but tissue donation is tremendously beneficial to people. Are any of you familiar with anyone who's received a transplant or may have received tissue in a surgery and you'd be interested in sharing? No? Like I said, often people don't know. that they have. Corneas are also considered a tissue. And for patients with active cancer, they are the most likely transplanted or donated tissue. And we talk about organ, eye, and tissue donation, but it's not actually an eye that is donated. We can't do eye transplants. And the tissue that is recovered looks like a contact lens. It's the cornea, the windshield of your eye. If you try to get an eyelash out of your eye or you put contacts in, you're touching your cornea. And, oh yeah. So, Becky, oh, I didn't even know there was a Becky on here. Hi, Becky. So cornea transplant is life-changing. I was in a classroom talking to Anna. A student said to me, I got a cornea transplant. I said, oh, will you share? Why did you need one? And he said, you know, I was a 7-year-old running around like a 7-year-old, and I came around the corner right as my mom took a hot pizza pan out of the oven. And he took the pizza pan to his eye, and it scorched his eye. And when it healed, it was no longer smooth and clear. And, you know, there's that kid sitting in the back of the room like this. And he goes, you got 2 eyes. What's the big deal? But the eyes are designed to work in binocular vision. And what they have found is that when someone has a damaged cornea, the other eye is straining to try to focus with that, and it diminishes the vision in the good eye. So it's very difficult to understand, but saving one eye will save both eyes.
Ellen, I do have a friend who has had a cornea transplant due to a health condition that she lives with. And unfortunately, she's had to have several of them over the span of her life. And then I do have a couple of friends who had organ transplants. They had type 1 diabetes. And when they went into kidney failure, they ended up being able to get a kidney pancreas transplant at the same time. And so they got a brand new pancreas along, and so that therefore no longer lived with type 1 diabetes. So I do have several friends who've gone through the procedures.
And it's dramatic. We have a volunteer who was diagnosed with diabetes at age 7. And at that point in time, she was on the oncology ward at Children's Hospital because kids didn't survive with cancer, or not with cancer, with diabetes. At the age of 50, her kidneys failed, and she got a transplant of a kidney and a pancreas. And she is so grateful, and she works so hard to honor her donor. His name is Daniel. And every year on the anniversary of her transplant, she celebrates Daniel Day, and she does something special to help others. Becky shared that she has scrubbed for cornea transplants. You might have some stories to tell too. You jump in here, feel free. Anne mentioned, I know a man who had a heart transplant, another who had heart and kidney transplant, liver. Partial liver, wow, you know a lot of people. It's been life-changing, even life-giving to them all. It truly is life-giving. Let's talk about what it means to get a partial liver transplant. It is possible to be a donor while you're alive. I will tell you this, to be a living donor, you have to be supremely healthy. Let's say one of my grandkids needed a kidney and I was a match. I'm not extremely overweight, but I would not qualify to be his or her donor until I was not overweight. Because when we are a living donor, we're protecting both the patient who's receiving the organ and we're protecting the patient who is donating and will go on to live. When we have deceased donors, the person has died and the health of that person is not the treatment of that person is very, very high priority. And we honor our donors and we treat them very respectfully. And donation takes place in the hospital setting, in the regular OR where we would have any other kind of surgery. But the focus is on who the recipient would be. Okay. So living donors can donate a kidney. They can also donate part of a liver, because the liver has this unique property that it will regenerate. And if we remove part of the liver, it will regrow to the full volume for that body. If I was going to be a liver donor and I was a living donor, they would remove, if it was someone my age, an adult, they would typically remove about 55% of my liver. And I'm kind of like, could you at least leave me 50%? You know, that makes me feel a little iffy. But they would remove that and then transplant it to the person who needs it. And not every disease of the liver will allow for partial liver transplant, but that liver would regrow in the recipient, and the part left behind in me would regrow to full volume as well. I think this is kind of miraculous. It's not typical. Typically, it takes 1 to 2 months to regrow, but doctors are not shocked and awe if it takes 2 weeks to regrow to full size volume. I'm like, 2 weeks? Can you feel that thing growing in there? Can you see that happening? You know, that's pretty miraculous in my mind. So it is possible to be a living donor. Again, the living donors are people that have to be supremely healthy. That is not necessarily the case with a deceased donor. And we're focusing on organ right now. So can you think of reasons why people might not be able to donate?
I was told that you couldn't donate if you had cancer.
Okay. And was that your oncologist that told you that?
No, it was for Lifeline. This was a bone marrow transplant maybe 30 years ago. Then 5 years after that, I had stage 0 breast cancer.
Okay.
So I called them and told them that, and they said, okay, you're off the list. And then maybe 5 years after that, I get a notice that they find a potential match
For bone marrow?
for bone marrow. So I called them up and I said, well, you must have changed your criteria. Because and they basically said, no, we didn't. We can't use you as a match.
Well, in Lifeline of Ohio does not facilitate bone marrow. That's done through the hospital, through the transplant center.
Okay. This was
but
so
I
long
will
ago, I
tell
don't
you-
remember who it was, 25 years ago. I don't know.
Oh,
who it
that's
was.
okay. I understand. But I will tell you that criteria change. For example, when I first started working at Lifeline, someone who was HIV positive had no potential possibility of being a donor of any sort,
Okay.
due to the risk of, sharing COVID with, or not COVID, HIV with someone else. However, we have something called the HOPE Act now. And after careful research, controlled studies, we can now recover organs from someone with HIV, and they are transplanted to a recipient who already is HIV positive.
Oh, okay.
What that means is the organ that was HIV negative that that person would have received is now available to transplant into someone else. And that's within the last 5 years.
Yeah.
When I first started working for Lifeline, someone with hepatitis C did not have the potential to be a donor. But we now have a cure for hepatitis C, and they are able to donate, obviously not the liver because hepatitis is a disease of the liver, but they could donate other organs, and the recipient will actually be started on medication to treat for hepatitis C before they even receive the organ.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've heard people and their doctors have told that their oncologists and even their primary care, you've had cancer, you can't be a donor. And that may have been true when that person was educated about donation. However, science is ever evolving, and I wouldn't expect my transplant doctor to know everything about all kinds of cancers. I wouldn't expect him to have the knowledge that an oncologist would. Just like there's oncologists that specialize in different types of cancer, I wouldn't expect them to know everything that's going on and changing in the transplant world too. So here's what I can assure you. Doctors will not recover tissue, cornea, or organs that they think would put anyone at risk. So what falls into your lap is making a decision of, would I be a donor if I could? Would I save 8 lives with organs? Would I heal someone and give sight to someone if I could be a donor? And if that is the case, then you have done your due diligence. You've done everything within your power by registering and talking to your family and letting them know what your decision would be. Then it's up to the medical professionals at the time of someone's death to make a decision based on the current science at that point in time. Another good example is COVID patients could not be donors last year or even 6 months ago. We didn't know enough about COVID to know whether a COVID patient could possibly be a donor of organ or tissue or corneas. At this point in time, they're still not donating tissue and cornea, but they have been able to donate organs. And that is because we've learned more about it, and it has the potential to be life-saving to those recipients. I can tell you a little story that'll give you an idea. The woman that I replaced at Riverside, sister was waiting on a lung transplant, and she got a call and they offered her, they had an offer, and recipients are always given the opportunity to decline an offer. They're fully informed about any risks. For example, if the donor had been a drug user, if the donor had hepatitis. And in this particular case, she'd been waiting for 2 years, couldn't walk across the room without stopping halfway to rest. And she got this call and they informed her, this is a high risk offer. The patient has been exposed to hepatitis C. Patient doesn't have it, but they've been exposed. And she called my friend that worked at Riverside, and she says, oh my goodness, I have so many health problems as it is. Why would I say yes to this? And Jenny, my friend, had to have a hard conversation with her, and it went something like this. You've been waiting for 2 years. This is the first offer you have received. At best, you have 4 months to live. Even if you got hepatitis C, it would take 10 years to kill you. Is it worth the risk? And our recipients, they're facing really, really difficult choices. There are people who say, no, I don't know that I want to have that transplant because I'll be taking medicine the rest of my life that will leave me immunosuppressed. And, cancer patients know well what extra precautions you have to take because your immune system is suppressed. So I'm glad you brought that up, Arlene. Science is changing, and many, many physicians still think it's not possible, and it wasn't at one time. It depends on organ function. It depends on the treatments the person has had. I had 2 patients when I worked at Riverside who both had gliomas, and one of them was able to be a donor and the other wasn't. And it was just dependent on the treatments that they had received and how they might impact the organs that this person would donate.
So you can check all that information when a person dies in a timely manner?
My old job was to go through every single connection to the hospital possible, and we could access if they had records in another. We do a medical social history. So when we meet with the family, and the medical social history is almost identical to all the questions that they ask when you give blood. But the difference is when you give blood, if you give a positive response to some of these then the answer is no, you can't donate blood.
Mhm.
Whereas with organs, because there's such a critical shortage, the answer is we need to investigate more. We're going to ask you some more questions. If the answer is, and some of these are complicated questions. There are questions about whether if a male has had sex with a male. At this point in time, they're not eligible blood donors, but it does not limit their ability to be an organ donor. But they will investigate additional information and they will do additional blood testing based on that knowledge. So there's extensive evaluation of every patient and their medical history before they can become a donor. When we make an offer to a transplant center, then the doctor there, and everything is anonymized. So every donor and every recipient has numbers, but no names affiliated with them. So a doctor can evaluate that. We can even send scans so the transplant surgeon can evaluate the scans and decide whether or not this is an organ that's suitable for his or her patient.
Okay. And then I
How
had
about-
heard years ago that after you were a certain age, there wasn't any use for organ. That's gone too?
The oldest organ donor to date was 92 years old,
Wow.
donated a liver, and the recipient has been living almost 20 years with that liver. So that's one really old liver. The oldest cornea donor was 107 years old.
Wow.
So you don't have to worry about age either. It's all about organ function and quality of tissue.
So
Susan, you had-
leave it on your driver's license and let somebody else figure it out. That's the
Absolutely.
idea. I'll just go ahead and do
Absolutely.
that.
That's great.
What about if you have, genetic cancer syndromes?
It would depend on the organ. For example, if you had the BRCA gene and you were concerned about breast cancer, that would not impact, say, kidney transplant or something like that. And the other thing is, we get people that call and they want to remove themselves. We'll do those phone banks at the TV station. And they'll say, well, I have COPD and I have CHF, and sometimes they have bunions and warts, and they give their whole medical history. And they're like, I want to take myself off. And again, it comes back to let the physicians worry about that. There is a thorough investigation. What makes a transplant surgery is very highly regulated, and they don't want anything to go wrong, because that's not going to bring anyone in the door, and they're committed to this. They're not only surgeons, but they've done fellowships and additional training. They're very vested in saving their patients' lives. So they would never recover anything that would put someone at risk. Here's the other thing. When I give blood, we can store it. They throw it in the fridge till they need it. I get a little text message when they're using it. But with organs cannot be stored. Organs are matched to a recipient while that person's in the hospital. Still, the surgery takes place in a hospital, regular operating room, and then that organ is transported immediately for transplant within hours. For example, the heart and lungs, we have 4 to 6 hours from the time an organ is recovered till it must be transplanted. So that when we're looking at matching organs, one of the parameters is how far away are they? So we might have a heart that matches a recipient in need that's in Arizona, but that's too far. We match blood type. They go so far as to take a drop of blood from the recipient and the donor and put them together and look for any immune response that would cause rejection syndrome. It's a miracle that someone gets an organ transplant. So many things have to line up and work out perfectly. Other questions, because
Yeah.
I want to tell you.
Yeah. Someone tell us about this. Someone from our church donated a kidney to her husband's best man, but it wasn't a direct donation. Hers
Okay.
went to somebody else, and that went to somebody else, and that went to somebody else. And it was like 5 or 6 people. And then it came back that her husband's best man got one from somebody completely different.
It's so remarkable. Let's say I wanted to give you a kidney, but we don't match.
Right.
And Debbie's got somebody who's willing to give her a kidney and they don't match. But I match Debbie and Debbie's potential donor matches you, then it makes a chain and comes back around to the beginning. We had one that began, it was conducted last year, and it began with, we were at it was 2 years ago, our Dash for Donation. And there was a gentleman who I saw every year who needed a kidney. And this year he was in a wheelchair. And then his family had made a sign that said, I need a kidney, B positive blood type, and listed the number. And someone was at that race. This was before COVID and we were there, saw the sign, chased him down and said, I'm already in the system. I've signed up to be an altruistic donor, which means I will donate to a complete stranger and give them a second chance at life. How do we connect? And took the number, connected. It ended up that he was not a match for that person, but because he was willing, that made the chain complete so that they could donate.
Yeah, this was like, I think it was like 5 or 6. I mean, it was a lot of different.
Yep. I think 16 is the max that they've done so far.
Wow.
Yeah. So
And had it
32
been- it had to be
participants.
done, I think, on the same day. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Because I think she may have gone to Cleveland for it because of the timing.
So other questions? I want to tell you what you want to know. Ian.
Yes, actually, I have 2 questions, but the first one is an organ that has been transplanted ever transplanted in the future to a different recipient?
It has happened. I personally know of a case where a heart was retransplanted, and I know of one where a kidney was retransplanted. That's pretty much a miracle for the kidney. In both cases, it was someone who received a transplant and then died due to other causes within the year of the transplant. So it does happen.
there's a
It's
time frame.
extraordinarily rare.
Wow, that's amazing.
I know, it's mind-boggling.
I'm wondering, yes, and I'm wondering where the largest number of transplants occur. My hometown from a long time ago is Pittsburgh, and they have a huge medical community that does a great number of transplants. Is that the largest area?
Pittsburgh is huge. Gift of Life is very active. We're considered an organ procurement organization, and we are not for profit by law. We're highly regulated by multiple federal and medical standards. I am not sure that Pittsburgh is the highest volume at this point. I think Vanderbilt might be down in Tennessee.
Really?
But there are 88 organizations who do what we do. So for example, Lifeline of Ohio works with 38 counties in Ohio. We're up to Lima, Mansfield, over to the river, to Jefferson County, down to Portsmouth, Marietta, and everything in between. And then we have 2 counties in West Virginia. Then there's an OPO called Life Center that serves the Cincinnati area. Life Bank serves the Cleveland area and up there. And then the Toledo-Dayton area is served by Life Connection. Now, there are other places in the country, for example, Northwest, they have Montana, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska are all within their service area. So it's pretty remarkable. Chicago also has very high volume area. But here's the thing. So in my 38 counties, I work with 78 different hospitals. Only 2 of them do transplants. Ohio State and Children's. In West Virginia, until last year, there was not a hospital that was doing liver transplants. There are no heart transplant programs. They started their first liver transplant program last year. So they were going to Pittsburgh, various other areas. We're very fortunate here in Ohio because we've got 2 programs here in Columbus, pediatric and adult. There's 2 programs in Cincinnati, pediatric and adult. There's 2 programs in Cleveland, pediatric and adult, and then Toledo as well. Does kidney transplants only. We had a gentleman who received an intestinal transplant. He had to go to University of Indiana to do. So it's a very highly specialized form of medicine. So there's all kinds of limitations and parameters. And I think the biggest thing that people need to understand is, I know when I registered to be an organ donor, I thought, I'm young, I'm healthy, no matter what, I'll be able to be a donor. It wasn't till we lost Jason that I realized that only 1 to 2% of people die in a way that allows them to be an organ donor. Now, the unique circumstances that make that, it's surprising, isn't it? The unique circumstances that make that possible. And that's responsible for that big gap between the 107,000 waiting and the 39,000 transplants. It's not that people aren't willing. Although we need more people to register so their families don't have to figure out what they would have decided. The biggest obstacle is that organ donors are people who die in a hospital setting. They die on a ventilator, and they die from an unsurvivable brain injury.
Are
So
those
that means-
requirements for
So that
donors?
means you can't use their organs then if they die from a brain injury?
No, those are the things that are true about all organ donors. They
Oh,
die
okay.
in a hospital on a ventilator from an unsurvivable brain injury. Now, they may have other things wrong with them, but that unsurvivable
That's
brain
the
injury.
ideal one. Okay. So you're looking at 1 to 2%. So these are 1 to 2% of the total people that would donate organs on their driver's license.
No, 1
No.
to 2% of all deaths.
Oh, of all deaths. Okay.
Okay.
All
And
right.
when we survey people, 90% of people say, I would be willing to be a donor. I support donation. I would want to receive an organ if I needed one. And yet our registration rate is about 60%.
Registration rate meaning on your driver's license.
Right. Or online. It's possible to register online. It's all the same database. It's possible to send in a paper registration. It's all the same database. What is unique about the paper and the online registration is it allows you to put limitations. For example, if the idea of donating your pancreas is just devastating because you're really connected to your pancreas, or what, you know, I joke with kids about that and they're like, what's a pancreas? You could put that limitation. You can select what you would be willing to donate and what you would prefer not to donate.
That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense though. If 60% of them happen on the driver's license, it should be more closely coordinated than 1 to 2% can actually be donors. Do you see
1
what I
to
mean?
2% of deaths occur in a way that allows for someone to be a
Okay.
donor.
So in other words, there's very strict requirements.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Only
Okay,
1
that-
to 2%
that
of
makes
people, you know, I use the example, if I have a steep hill behind my house, if I fell down the hill, hit my head, and I was there for a little while,
You're
but
right.
I died at that location, I could possibly donate my corneas and my tissues, depending on the length of time that I was down there. If I fell down that same hill and my neighbor spotted me and they get the squad, and the squad gets me, and they put me on the ventilator. And then my brain continues to swell, because what happens is when there's a brain injury, whether it's from lack of oxygen, whether it's from a trauma, or whether it's due to a cerebrovascular accident like a stroke or an aneurysm, it causes swelling within the brain. And the problem is, and doctors will do everything possible to save this patient's life. They will even remove a piece of the skull to allow more room to swell. They will drill a hole and put a drain in that allows fluid to come out. But when the swelling is excessive, then the brain essentially pinches the blood vessels between the skull and the brain, and it cuts off blood flow in and out of the brain.
Sure.
And those are the people who end up able to become a donor. And the reason being that if they are on a ventilator, even though they have died, there is no more brain activity. The brain is not, they don't have brainstem reflexes, and this requires extensive testing. An oxygenated heart continues to beat.
Right.
And
Okay.
that means that circulation continues, even though they've died, circulation will continue while they're on that ventilator. They will do extensive testing and scans to see whether there's any blood flow to the brain. It's not a coma. If I'm in a coma, I have some blood flow to my brain and I have some brain activity. But if I am brain dead, I have no blood flow and no brain activity. And there's extensive testing to establish that. But because that heart is still beating, then that person has potential to be an organ donor. Those are very rare circumstances.
There's nothing you can really do to increase that.
No.
No, that's it. Yeah.
And we don't want to.
Right.
Therefore, what we do is work to educate everybody to make sure that their family knows that if they could be a donor, they want to be. In working with families, the hardest thing for me was a family that the person was not registered and the family had never talked about it. Because the family wanted to make the decision that that person would have made for themselves. And yet there was no way to bring them back to confirm, yes, you're making the decision I would make for myself. So if you hear nothing else I said today, here's the most important thing. Talk to your family and let them know what you would decide for yourself. And I tell people, families don't all have to agree. If you're my sister and you want to be a donor and I want no part of it, here's what we can agree upon. I promise that if something were to happen to you, I will make the decision you would make for yourself. If you promise to make the decision for me that I would make for myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I tell students, registering means you make the decision for yourself. You're not leaving it up to someone else to decide. We've had circumstances where my job was to answer all the family's questions, and parents would say, yeah, she's 16 and she was a registered donor, but she didn't know what that meant. And another sibling would jump in and say, oh, yes, she did, because we talked about it. Some lady came and talked at her health class. And I said, yeah, I heard that same lady. And it is what she wanted. And that person went on to save 5 lives. But had she not spoken to her sister, that might very well have meant that those 5 lives would not have been saved.
Yeah.
It's a miracle.
It absolutely. Go ahead.
My friend's mother was a donor, and she was ready to she was in a situation where my friend could donate her organs, but her siblings didn't want their mother's organs donated, and they were able to stop it. I mean, if you've got somebody that says they want to be a donor, you can have a family member that's advocating for it, and yet there are other family members that said no. This wasn't in Ohio, it was in
Okay.
Louisiana.
And I will be honest, it depends on the state. Here in Ohio, the belief is if you have registered and made a decision for yourself
Mhm.
and you made it, you know, of sound mind, you made it when you weren't compromised and sick, then it's up to us to respect and honor your decision. Now, I will tell you this. I lied. I once had a situation, and I'll explain what it was. I never had a family say no to somebody's decision, even if they didn't agree with it, if they knew what that person wanted.
Mhm.
That's why that conversation is so important. The only time I did have a situation, the husband and the daughter deferred to the son, and he was concerned because he knew that his mother was a drug user, and he thought that would be discovered if she became a donor. Well, when she went in the hospital that bad a shape, it was already discovered. But they did defer to him. And she was not registered, but the husband knew what she wanted. And that was the only case I had. And it was really difficult because I felt like we were letting her down. Other questions? Ian?
Yes. Let me know if I've got this right.
Okay.
So the 3 requirements to qualify as a donor are you must be in the hospital on a ventilator.
Hold on, I'm going to
and
stop you
brain
for 1
dead.
second to clarify. The 3 requirements to be an organ donor.
Organ
Tissue
donor,
donor,
okay.
the death, and
So,
go ahead.
okay, so in my case, I have it on my driver's license that I would like to be a donor. But if I'm in the hospital and I haven't been in a car accident or driving, I may not have my driver's license with me.
Not a problem. The hospital has no access to that database, but the hospital is required to report every death to an organization. In our area, it's our organization, or in any other. This is federal law. It's our responsibility, and we are the only ones who can access that database. Now, if you don't show up in our database, and maybe you were traveling from Michigan, we try to get, they will have identified somebody. The hospital will have tried to identify next of kin. We will then check with Michigan. They will access and report and send us the record if you're registered. So there's very formal strategies for making sure we look to see what someone's decision is, and it will be your most recent decision. So an example is we had a woman who was pregnant, very pregnant, and the AC wasn't working at the BMV, and she was just in a hurry to get out of there. So she said no to anything she thought would keep her in line longer, including donation. She went home and she's, I forgot about that, and registered online. Her most recent decision is the decision that will be honored. So even if it's on your license, if you changed your decision by going online or sending in a form, we will go by your most recent decision. They will
So
identify you.
if it's on your driver's license, are you considered to be registered?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
If it's on your license, at some point in time, you answered yes to the question, would you like to be an organ donor? And you're registered for organ, tissue, and cornea. And it only applies upon your death. Most adults get this, but when I'm talking about this to kids, sometimes they're like, can I wait till I graduate? Because I would hate to screw up prom or, my football game or something. I'm like, no one's coming knocking on your door. This is a registration that says, upon my death, I author. Kids are cute. So what else?
Well, thank you
are
for all that information.
You're very welcome. What else are you curious about? Any other
We
questions?
probably have time for just one more question.
I think,
Okay.
Ellen, I have a
I
question.
would just say that I
wait,
really
Debbie's,
appreciate.
Debbie's jumping in here, right?
Okay, sorry.
If I were to register online
Mhm.
or by paper through the mail, would I get a card since this is not going to be on my driver's license until I go to renew my driver's license the next time? Do you get an ID card?
You would not receive an ID card. But again, if something were to happen, we check that electronically, so you wouldn't have to worry about it.
Then when I go for my next driver's license, do I tell them, well, I registered online, and then do they put a note on the license?
You can
or-
just say, I would like to be an organ donor,
Okay,
and they will attach it. If it's not on your license, they will ask you, would you like to be an organ donor? If they don't, you can tell them that. If it's already on your license, they do not continue to ask you every time. And that's just a matter of expediency.
okay, thanks.
So,
There's a funny story. I volunteered at Suicide Prevention Hotline. And we had a senior line for seniors, a teen line, and a regular line. And somebody called on the teen line, and she thought the senior line was just for seniors in high school. That kind of tells you how teens think.
they do. I'm going to put my email in here. And if you don't have a pencil or pen handy, I
And
can't
then-
type and talk at the same time. Isn't that awful?
And no, I understand. I can relate, Ellen. And also, I have your contact information. So if anybody reaches out to me, I'd be happy to forward that.
You can feel free to call me. You can feel free to email me. My biggest thing is to encourage you to talk to your family about what your wishes would be and find out what they want. Because you could be in the position where you're making a decision for them and you want to do what will honor their wishes.
Thank you so very much, Ellen. We greatly appreciate you sharing your time and your expertise and your knowledge with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. You are a wonderful group of people.